welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya Master Anne-Marie Young. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Anne-Marie, I said before we got started here that this is going to be fun. And I don't know, I hope I didn't pre-sell it to you or something like that, because I think this really is going to be fun. But you got to meet our guest before we got going here. I mean, you get the vibe I'm getting out of this?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff in today's show.
I think so too. It's going to be a lot of fun. So let's not waste any time. We'll bring him right onto the stage here. His name is Brent Michael Phillips. And Brent has a background I really like, because he is a guy who, like me, started left brain and discovered there's more to the brain than the left. There's also a right brain, and there's a middle, and there's a cortex, and there's all this other stuff going on at the same time, and it's got some really cool faculties that go along with it. The cool part is going to be finding out what the story is behind that. So Brent, welcome to the program. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. This is awesome.
This is going to be a lot of fun, I can tell. But first, you got to give people the broader story than what I just gave. I gave the 20-second version. You got to give us at least a couple minutes version.
Sure. So first thing I would say is I never thought I'd be doing anything like this. Wow. Right. Probably like you said, Walt, is growing up, I was just your huge nerd. I loved video games, computer programming, Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. And so when it was time for me to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, it was a pretty easy choice. I'm like, I want to be a computer programmer. And, I had written my first video game when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
Yep. And so I went to MIT, and that's where I discovered the internet, which sounds funny to the younger listeners, but back when I grew up, no one had ever heard of it, right? And I thought, wow, this internet is going to change the world. And it has, even beyond what I expected. And that became the focus of my studies. So I went on to grad school at MIT, and I was part of the Telemedia Networks and Systems group under Professor Tenenhouse. Okay. And we did some really cool stuff. Me and the two guys I shared an office with, we sent the first ever live synchronized audio video stream over the web in 1994.
Wow, fabulous.
Yep. We were an official part of the first round of what's called the World Wide Web Consortium.
Right.
When it was just like 6 grad students and a professor in a conference room, right?
Yeah.
I'm very proud I contributed a little bit of code to Apache back in the old days.
Congratulations. That's fabulous.
Yep. And I was working towards my PhD when the internet boom hit in 1995.
Okay.
And so long story short, I'm like, this is my gold rush. And I really thought I was going to be enormously successful. So I left MIT, moved to California, recruited my lifelong best friend to start 2 internet companies. One to build websites, one for video games. And we had a lot of success at first. It's kind of funny today, but the very first website I ever built in my entire life was the website for the launch of the Sony PlayStation in the summer of 1995. Yep. That was my very first website I'd ever built.
Wow.
And we did the first website for Disneyland, Nissan Motors, a lot of video game publishers. But I quickly got bored of the web, especially 1990s web. There was only so much you could do. So I was building right on top of TCP/IP with my video game, and we created the first of what today we call MOGs, or massively multiplayer online role-playing games. And my MOG Underlight launched in January of 1997.
Wow.
And it's still running today. So anyone that's a gamer, go to Steam. It's still available as a free game on Steam. It's been running for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Which I think is amazing. But long story short, I really thought I was going to be a superstar, make millions of dollars. My original plan was to retire by 30 and spend the rest of my days partying and hot tubbing with supermodels. But let's just say, you ever heard that old joke? How do you make God laugh? Tell him your plans. Tell him your plans. And so long story short, I had a massive health crisis. And there were a lot of pieces to it. I had chronic Lyme disease, though I had no idea for years and years. I also was suffering from chemical poisoning from aspartame.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. In addition to, I had, I was born with a neurological disease that I wasn't aware of till I was, in my 30s. And I had developed crippling repetitive stress injuries because I was working, literally 100 hours a week.
Yeah, that's not good for you.
Because I wanted to be successful more than anything. I was willing to pay any price. And I figured, well, I'll sacrifice a few years in my 20s to party the rest of my life and have fun. And I destroyed my body. And at first, I wasn't too concerned. I figured you go to the doctor, they'll give you something, you feel better, right? Up to that point in my life, it had always been that simple. But I spent 3 years in conventional therapies, and I just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And eventually, I worked my way up the food chain. And I remember it was early 1998. I got an appointment to see the head doctor at the Curlin Job Physical Therapy Clinic, which was a big, because that's considered by many to be one of the top in the world. And I was going there for 3 years for treatments. And, I met some of my favorite sports stars that were rehabbing injuries, right? The Lakers, the Dodgers, Olympians were all there. And I thought, this guy will know what to do, right? So I was so excited. I went in to see him. I'm like, please tell me what to do. I was in terrible chronic pain. I could barely work. I'd gone from 100 hours a week to about 10. I had to move in with my parents because a lot of days I was in so much pain. I needed help just getting dressed and eating breakfast.
Wow.
Really, really bad. But I'm like, tell me what to do. Fix me, doc, right? And I'll never forget, he's there looking at my medical records, and he kind of scratched his chin and looked up at me and he said, well, I'm sorry, son. There's nothing I and a doctor can do here.
Wow.
You'll never be able to work again.
Oh my goodness.
And I was just like, what? I mean, I was honestly speechless. I was so surprised I couldn't even say anything. And the last thing he said before I left, he said, son, you got someone that can take care of you until you die.
Ooh.
And I had just turned 27 years old.
Wow.
And he recommended me for lifetime disability, which is very rare that you get approved that young in life. Usually you're missing limbs or paralyzed or blind. And basically sent me home to die. And on the way out, his secretary was like, oh, Mr. Phillips, just so you know, we've canceled all your appointments. Please don't ever come back. We can't be spending our resources on impossible cases like you.
Oh my God.
So that just medicine slammed the door in my face. And I went to tell my best friend, my lifelong best friend. We were close like brothers, so much so that all my girlfriends had issues with how close we were. And I expected him to be all, hey, Brent, got your back. We'll get through it. Right. What I didn't know was he had been secretly dating the woman I was crazy in love with.
Oh.
And so he used this as an opportunity to fire me from the companies I had founded. And just so you know, I was the one working 100 hours a week. It was my genius, my sweat, my ideas that built these up, not his. And he fired me from the companies, forged paperwork, sold the website company for millions of dollars behind my back. And I was left broke, put on lifetime disability, living with my parents with no hope of recovery. So, the end. Just kidding. But very long story short, I turned to alternative medicine.
I kind of expect you to just say, and then I woke up.
Yeah, and then I woke up.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. And so I turned to alternative medicine. I was doing homeopathy and acupuncture and cleanses and all this stuff. I got into positive thinking. Now we call it the law of attraction. In the 90s, we called it positive thinking. And I was really gung-ho. And over the next 5 years, I'm living with my parents, running around as my full-time job, trying to get better. And I just got worse and worse and worse. And it all came to a head. It was early 2003. I agreed to have an experimental surgery because I was so desperate. And long story short, I woke up from the surgery and my right arm was paralyzed. And so that was kind of rock bottom. And I tried all sorts of things to heal my arm and it wouldn't go. And it was about 6 months later, it was actually my Aunt Lauren recommended I go see her friend Terry, that she had been, high-flying professional, worked in finance, made tons of money, Wharton School MBA. And she had been infected by black mold that almost killed her. Ooh. And she found this process of energy healing that literally saved her life. And Lauren had been telling me, Brent, have you seen Terry? I'm like, no, it's new age nonsense, right? I'm like, no. And finally, she's like, okay, Brent, if you will go talk to Terry, I will not only pay for your session, I will take you out to dinner at any restaurant you choose.
Okay.
I was like, is Drago on the table? She's like, yes, I'll even take you to Drago. I'm like, okay, I'm in. Right? That was fancy.
That's good.
Yeah. It was a fancy restaurant in Santa Monica, right? And so I remember going to see Terry. And she explained, okay, your physical issues are caused by subconscious blocks. I'm like, sounds kind of nutty, but whatever, right? And she explained it all to me, and it actually made a little sense. And so she used this process involving, subconscious block clearing and theta brain waves. And she asked me about my childhood and all I'd been through, right? And we're doing this whole process. But honestly, it was interesting, but I thought it was a waste of time. Because I'm like, I'm not here to talk about my feelings or what happened when I was 9. I'm here because I can't move my arm and I'm in pain, right? And I didn't see how that had anything to do with anything. So at the end of the hour, she was like, okay, let's take care of your arm. And I'm like, yeah, lady, you and what army, right? And I remember she's sitting across the room from me, because this is all done with the mind. There's no hands-on, there's no manipulating the body, no touching, nothing you take. It's just conversation.
Right.
And what they call like conversational hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, give me a minute. And I'm there looking out the window, thinking about, what do I want to get on the way home for lunch, right? I think there's a Law and Order marathon on TNT. That'll be cool, right? And it was the craziest thing. I felt a burning sensation in the side of my neck. At the same time, I felt like a loud bang or crack in my elbow. It was like a firecracker went off. And I was like, whoa, right? It really surprised me. And I remember Terry opened her eye. She's like, try your arm. And I did. And I was like, oh my God. No, what I said was actually more R-rated. I won't repeat it here.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Just in case there's children listening, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, oh my, I could not believe it. My arm, paralyzed by the surgery, instantly healed and was moving again. And so that was the life-changing miracle that got me on this path. And I was like, Terry, you got to teach me this. And she's like, no problem. We got a training coming. And but before we go further, I like to be really honest with everyone, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. What did not happen? All of my problems were not solved in an hour, right? It was not that simple. But my paralyzed arm from the surgery did instantly heal. Though I still had all the same chronic pain, I was still dealing with depression and anxiety and back pain and all these other things. But the paralyzed arm really did instantly heal. Though it took me a lot more sessions and training and work over years to improve the rest of my stuff, right? That's the truth. Didn't all become perfect in an hour. But long story short, I learned everything I could from her, became one of the first masters in the system. And 5 years later, my life blew up again. I had gotten married and my first wife left me. Then I was injured badly in a car accident. And then I lost my disability. And it was just this whole mess that ended up with me going bankrupt after a crooked financial advisor stole all of my money and forged documents and took out loans in my name and against my property that left me over $1 million in debt.
Forgive me for saying so, but I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yeah, there is a crazy numerological pattern of my life blows up every 5 years, except for 1988. That's the one exception. My whole life, every 5 years, something goes terribly wrong. But I still don't understand exactly what's going on. And it was the day after I declared bankruptcy, I met the man who I now consider my mentor, the late Carl Wolf. And it was actually, I was seeing a life coach at the time, because my life was in the dump. I needed help, right? And I had worked with him for over a year. We had done over 110 hours together. And he didn't know what to do with me. And he was like, well, Brent, we got to kick you up the food chain to the master. And true story, before I went bankrupt, I spent my last $500 buying a session with Carl. And the crazy thing numerologically, our first session was on November 11th, 2008, 11/11. And I remember he said, meet me at the rollerblade rental station on Venice Beach. I'm like, that's a weird place to do healing, right? Usually it's like in my office or on the phone or something, right? Or, maybe a nature retreat. But no, meet me at the rollerblade. I'm like, okay. So I met him there, and he's got an assistant with a camera on me the whole time, like I'm some kind of celebrity. And I remember I rented the rollerblades, and he had me rollerblade in circles around the parking lot for about 20 minutes and filmed me. And then we sat in his car and we watched the video. And long story short, he just ripped me a new one. telling me all these things that were wrong with my energy, right? And after that, he's like, okay, we're done. And I went home. And I was furious because I didn't think anything had happened. Because I wanted him to like smudge me or say a prayer or do a healing or smack me in the forehead and shout hallelujah or something, right? All he did was videotape me rollerblading and criticize me. And I went home and I called my life coach and I chewed his ass. I'm like, dude, what's wrong with you? That was my last $500. I'm now bankrupt. I'm totally screwed. Why did you have me do this, right? And I remember his name was Brian. And he said to me, Brent, I get it. Carl's out there. But he said, just do me a favor, give it 3 weeks. And he said, if nothing shifts and changes in 3 weeks, please let me know. I will make it up to you. You know, I'll give you more sessions. I could even repay you if that's what you really want. I was like, all right.
That's a high
So I
level
marked
of
my
feedback
calendar,
there.
right? I appreciated that. So I marked my calendar 3 weeks out, you know, call Brian. She was butt off again. And the crazy thing was, it didn't take 3 weeks. It didn't even take 3 days. 2 days later, my business exploded. And I had made over $50,000 in the 3 days after that. Right. The craziest thing. And I remember I called Brian. I'm like, dude, I'm really sorry. You are correct. This Carl guy is magic. Thank you. And, you know, long story short, I studied with him intensively for years. And it's pretty crazy that he told me later, you know, we became very close personal friends. He was my son's godfather. And he had told me later, he goes, Brent, when I first met you, you were stuck deeper in your head than anyone I've ever worked with. And I've been doing this full time since the 1970s, which is pretty crazy, right? I also want to point out that when I met him and had my first session, what we call movement feedback holography, I had been a full-time energy healing practitioner for 5 years. So it's not like I was fresh off the boat to the New Age world. I'd been to certifications in probably 12 different modalities, right? I had learned Reiki healing and pranic healing, and I had trained in Psych K and matrix energetics and all these things, right? But what Carl did was so far out there, I didn't understand it at all. And crazy thing is, about 8 years later, I was the first and only person he ever gave permission to teach and practice his work.
Really?
Which is pretty nuts. Because when he first met me, he said, Brent, I thought you were the least likely person I'd ever met. I didn't think you'd stick with it. I certainly didn't think you'd be the one I'd be handing the torch to.
Wow.
Right? And, to give everyone an idea, what I learned from Carl, it is weird. It's different. It's totally unlike, many of the other energy healing, law of attraction, mind power processes. Not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just very different. But, my background is in technology. And I'm an engineer, right? I like to say I'm an engineer that does new age things. I'm not a new ager. Because I'm still who I am.
Sure.
And I like to think of self-improvement in terms of technology. Mm-hmm. I call it consciousness technology. How do we use this consciousness, this gift we're given, as a practical tool to make shifts? Because that's what engineers do. Scientists figure out how the universe works. Engineers put that knowledge into practice to actually build useful things.
Sure.
Right? And I'm an engineer more than a scientist. And so I like to think in terms of what I call the 3 generations of consciousness technology. That, in my understanding, all the stuff we do kind of fits into one of these 3 generations. The first generation is kind of your very well-known law of attraction, positive thinking. So The Secret is a great example, or Think and Grow Rich, right? Mm-hmm. Focus on the positive, make a vision board, say your mantras, etc. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just very basic.
Sure.
And it's a great start, but most people find it doesn't really move the needle. That someone had joked once, if the law of attraction were the solution to everything, we could just airdrop 50,000 copies of The Secret on starving parts of the world and they'd be fine. It's not that simple. And again, I had done all this positive thinking, law of attraction in the 90s. It didn't do anything for me. But that's just, it's a nice foundation we build on. Worth doing. But that alone is not going to get you there. Kind of like if you wanted to be a professional football player, lifting weights is a good thing to do, right? but lifting weights alone does not get you to the NFL. There's a lot more to it.
Mhm.
And so the first generation is great, but for most of us, doesn't do what we want. Then the second generation is where it gets really interesting. The difference is with the second generation tools, we have a process to directly work with the subconscious mind. And so that was what I learned from Terry O'Connell, was how to use muscle testing to check for subconscious blocks, and then how to do different systems of focused prayer meditation to make shifts. And so many of the well-known familiar modalities kind of fit that. So NLP, theta healing, Psych K, emotion code, healing code, they're all a very similar paradigm of let's find the blocks and go in and apply a process to remove them.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's tapping or generating electrical waves or sound or a meditative prayer. There's lots of different ways.
Mhm.
And in my experience, the second gen techs are really powerful and useful. You can get a lot of good results, especially with physical healing.
Mhm.
That's where we start to see medical miracles occur, such as my elbow instantly healing.
Mhm.
People instantly healing from cancer or migraines or back pain or things, right? So very powerful tool. But here's what I found. Even after I had learned healing and gotten off disability and started a business and gotten married and kind of had a real life again, I was still suffering. I was still unhappy because the second gen tools are very much applied from the mind, and they don't get as deep into the body in terms of what we call embodiment, of living the truth of the teachings versus just knowing it. And I was a master of knowing the teachings. I've read thousands of spiritual books. I've taught 250 weekend seminars, attended probably 50 more. I got dozens of certifications and modalities, but I was still miserable. And that leads us to the third generation. That's what I learned from Carl. The third generation tools is a combination of meditative entrainment that we call beaming or consciousness shifting, along with using physical movements to make shifts in our energy patterns. And I told this little story about my first session rollerblading.
Mhm.
I didn't know it at the time, but Carl had been beaming me with energy. And then when he read my energy, he was giving me feedback on what he saw in the movements. And the thing I love about the third generation tools is they can do something nothing else can. It can actually get consciousness back into your body. And the reason I had lost millions of dollars, ended up in chronic pain, gone bankrupt was simple. I had this great head full of all this knowledge and such, but I had squeezed the consciousness out of my body and I had no idea. And the movement allows us to refill ourselves. It's the metaphor I like is it's like a tube of toothpaste. That when we're born, we're full of consciousness. We're brimming with life, for the most part, assuming we're not sick or drug addicted or something when we're born. Little infants, the day they're born, have a phenomenal energy. It's gone within 24 hours. It's crazy. The only time I've been beamed more powerfully than Carl could was the day my son was born.
Mhm.
And it was gone the next day. And so as we grow up, we're slowly squeezing the toothpaste out of the tube. Every trauma, every illness, every setback, every harsh word squeezes a little more life force out of us. And so most of us, by the time we're middle-aged, we're like that tube of toothpaste you've been using too long, that we're jumping on and pressing on, trying to get that little bit of toothpaste left, not realizing that we got to refill it, right? Well, one option is get a new tube of toothpaste. That'll work. That's what we call dying, right? You can die and come back in a new body, and that works. But this technology, this movement feedback holography, the beaming, all these things we call the Carl stuff or the third generation work, that can actually get the toothpaste back in the tube. And that is, really what I want to highlight because, the first generation is worth doing. But honestly, everyone knows about it, right? Go watch The Secret, go read Think and Grow Rich. You got it. There's not a lot to it. The second generation is absolutely worth learning and applying, 100%. For yourself, for your friends, to be able to clear subconscious blocks and do healings, learn intuition, to manifest. Yes, worth learning. But there's a lot of things it can't do. I'm here to talk about the third generation because there's almost nobody else out there that knows how to do this. There's many wonderful healers using second gen modalities. For sure, right? A lot of them are my friends and colleagues. But this third gen work is very visceral. It's physical. It's more in the body than the mind. And I'll warn everyone, it's weird. It's different. That when I first learned energy healing from Terry, what I would call the second gen tools, it took me about 1.5 years from my very first session to when I was teaching it. With Carl's work with the third gen, it was 6.5 years. So it has a steep learning curve. It is harder to learn. It doesn't make any sense at first. But once it clicks, watch out. And so, if you were to ask me, hey, Brent, if someone in your family had cancer, what would you do? I'd apply the second gen tools. That's what works best. But if you want to make more money, if you're struggling with low self-esteem, if your life seems very small and limited, my experience, the second gen tools can't do a lot there. But the third gen hits the spot. And so I use all three in my daily life, in my practice, and what I teach and how I work with clients. But I'm here mainly to talk about the third gen because, again, I'm not sure it's unique because I can't say no one else in the world does it because I don't know everybody in the world, right?
Met them all yet?
Yeah, but I haven't found, because I've been doing this work as a professional healer for over 20 years full time. I haven't found anything that's really close to what I learned from Carl, the third gen stuff. And I want people to know that if you're feeling stuck, if you're still suffering, even after you may have achieved your goals, this may be the thing you need to move you forward. I would just say, I hope you're not as stubborn and thick-headed as me. It took me a massive life crisis, a divorce, a multi-million-dollar loss, and a bankruptcy to get to the point where I was desperate enough to let go of what I thought I knew, to let in something different, right? I see Anne-Marie shaking your head.
Yeah. Well, it's always
I'm just thinking,
yes,
they were really trying to drive you to this path. They were throwing everything they had at you to get into this line.
Yeah, that if there had been a medical solution to my problems in the 90s, I never would have gotten into this. If the surgery had cured me of all my pain and I went back to work, I never would have gotten into this. But it took a really high level of desperation and crisis to open me up, to do something different, to take a risk. And so, I'm hopeful that your listeners don't need to be pushed to that point of crisis and desperation. But if you do, don't worry, you're in good company. Every high-level healer and energy worker I've known in my entire life got into it through some kind of crisis. So you're in good company. But it's just so you know, it's not necessary. If your life is going okay, there's nothing stopping you from embracing this work and being even more okay.
Sure.
Right? It's just not how we work. Like, I have found that for the most part, we humans keep doing things the way we've always done them until it's glaringly obvious that it's not going to work anymore. Only then do we open our minds and look around and try something new. So again, if that's you, no worries. I get it, right? I'm here for you. But you don't need that. It's okay to make a big shift without a crisis. It's just harder.
So let me stop you there, and I want to get a term defined. I mean, we both are left-brainers, right? So we have to define our terms.
Of course.
The term that I want you to define is getting consciousness back into your body. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I'll give a great example that everyone can relate to. That most of us in our modern culture are pretty well embodied, meaning we have a lot of consciousness in our hands and in our head and in our neck. But we tend to have very little in our hips, our legs, and our feet. So here's a fascinating thing, that if we look at the human hands and the human feet, and I'll spare you the indignity of me pulling up my foot to show you, right?
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yes, I'm not a yoga master, right? In terms of the anatomy, the bones and the tendons and the muscles, they're nearly identical. Why? We evolved from four-legged ancestors. So we have pretty much the identical set of muscles and bones and things. They're just a little bigger or smaller in our feet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no anatomical reason why we can't move our toes like we move our fingers.
Some people learn to do that, actually.
Yes, some people have.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll encourage everyone listening. See if you can take your hand and move just your middle finger.
Mm-hmm.
Almost everyone can do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not hard unless you have injuries or some kind of illness. Now I want to see you do that with your feet.
With your middle toe, yeah.
Right? Move your middle toe, but not the others.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nobody can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? We have lost consciousness in our feet. It has been mapped out of our brain in a sense. And so parts of the body that are full of consciousness, you can feel and use. We have a lot of sensitivity and skill with them.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of the body where you've lost consciousness, we quote, can't feel it as much. It doesn't mean it won't hurt, right? Someone breaks your toe, it hurts.
Sure.
Yeah. But it does mean you can't perform the fine movements with it. And so many of us, again, usually we have a lot of consciousness in our neck, our head, and our hands. And for most people, the lower you go on your body, the less consciousness you have. And especially the place where we're really challenged is our hips, our legs, and our feet. It's very rare I see someone that has embodiment all the way down. Most of them have big careers and are making millions of dollars. Just to throw out a couple examples, baseball player Trey Turner, he's really embodied, amazing. You know, if you want to have a fun time, Google perfect slide. You watch him slide into home, it will take your breath away. It's like, oh my God, how does he do that? Back in the old days, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, they had embodiment all the way down. You watch them move and dance, it's amazing.
It is.
Yes. So the closest you'll find is usually dancers. The dancers, the whole body moves fluidly like they're made out of rubber. That's someone that can really feel their body, but that's very rare. Most of us get stuck up in our head by the time we become adults.
Yeah.
And what I want to do for people is what I offer is in Chinese medicine, they talk about the three-legged stool, which is basically acupuncture, the Tai Chi, and meditation. And I have my own version of the three-legged stool, which is to reach those higher levels of consciousness, to expand your life, to be healthier, to feel good, to make more money, to have a bigger, more expansive life. Requires what I would say is the meditative aspect, what we call the beaming, which is a lot of fun. You'll start to see energy and auras and past lives with your open eyes as we gently expand your perception.
Let me interrupt you for just a second.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get the word right.
Yes.
Was the word beam or ream?
Beaming, B-E-A-M-I-N-G.
B-E-A-M, beaming,
Yes.
beaming. Okay. I want to make sure I got that right. Yeah.
Yes, the beaming is crazy because when I was working with Carl, he talked about beaming, and I had no idea why he called it that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just accepted it. I'm like, you're the master. You know, my generation, we listened to our teachers. We didn't question them, right? And then about 6-7 years after I was working with Carl, I was working with another life coach, and I was talking about this, and he goes, "What the heck is beaming, Brent?" I'm like, you know what? Rather than talk about it, let me just do it with you. And we were having lunch at an Italian restaurant. I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn up the beam for you here. And I remember, I started to bring him into, what we call the field of consciousness. It kind of, we're kind of reconnecting you into the quantum field or the field of consciousness, divinity. And we're sitting there having lunch, and all of a sudden he sat back and his eyes got big, and he grabbed the arms of his chair. It's like, whoa, I just saw beams of light shoot out of your eyes. And I was like, oh, that's why Carl calls it beaming. Now, just to be clear, I've never seen the beams of light, but I've had people tell me they see it. So that's why we call it beaming. Okay. You're literally sending a frequency through your eyes into the other person.
Okay.
So that's the meditative aspect. That's one of the legs of the stool. The movement feedback holography, doing the physical movements to clear the deep blocks, to get the consciousness back in your body. That's the second leg. And the third leg is what we call the study of awakening, also called non-duality or Advaita Vedanta, which is simply about understanding what is this you? What is this you that has consciousness? Because most of us thinking we're sitting up in our head behind our eyes, right? What exactly is that? How does it work? Where did it come from? And a full discussion of awakening would take many hours. We don't have that much time. I just want to give everyone a hint right now. And this is written in the Vedic scriptures thousands of years ago. You are not a noun, you are a verb.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was so interesting. I was watching a documentary on the life of Moses on Netflix. And one of the things they said is, we take away from the teachings of Moses that God is not a separate being, a noun. God is a verb. I was like, that's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that Moses guy was onto something, right? And so you put them together. It really does, for most people, bring your life to a higher level. But again, I want to be honest. This is not a magic wand that makes the whole world the way you want it. It's really not. If I had that magic wand, I would have put out the wildfires a week ago. There's a lot of, the places that I grew up in, Palisades, West Malibu, gone. I would fix my life, my neighbors, my family. I'd end corruption and terrorism and starvation and war and global degradation of the environment. No, it's not a tool to make everything the way you want. It is a tool to learn to let go, to see past the illusion of the ego. Because, we all think we're so smart and we're so clever, right? In particular, we all think we know best for us and our family. I'll just offer, maybe that's not always true. Maybe the mind and the ego don't always know what's best, but we assume that. And we get so upset when life takes us the wrong way, right? We lose a job, our business closes, we have to sell our home, we get divorced, we get sick, we have pain. And so ultimately, this is a process not of controlling life, but of letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Of letting go of these deep resistances and blockages from the mind and the ego to really more fully embrace the divine agenda. And, I'll say again bluntly, if you learn this and apply it, it's not like bad things never happen. Carl died. He was run over by a truck when he was riding his bike. And so, I knew him for over 10 years. Bad things happened to him. He had a pipe burst in his condo, right? He had someone total his car in a parking lot. I could go on, right? He had a problem with his tooth and had to go to the dentist, right? So it's not that your life will be perfect or than those bad things. But the way I would put it is to use just divorce as one example among the many pains in life. All of my more advanced students and long-term clients that have gone through divorces, every last one of them found it painful and sad and difficult. But every last one of them came out of it at a better place. And that's what I can offer. It's not that everything will be the way you want. It's not that bad things will never happen. But when you learn to let go and trust the flow of life, it is, to quote the way one of my favorite bands called Fate's Warning, when someone had said about them, their music is fascinating because it doesn't take you where you expect it to go, which is why they've never been popular. But it always takes you somewhere better. And I think that's a great description of a spiritual life, right? These tools, the work, this path does not always take you where you expect it to go. We'd all like to be billionaires for the most part, right? And have perfect health and slim, attractive bodies and live a long time and be famous and have, 6 homes or whatever, right? That's not going to happen for everyone. But if we're willing to let go of all our limiting beliefs and our limited myopic vision of reality, again, coming from the ego and the mind, the divine flow of life will take you to somewhere better. And, I don't know for sure because my life didn't go that way, but I think had my life gone the way I wanted and I had made millions in the 90s and all that, I would have been wealthy and successful, but I would have been incredibly miserable and probably a giant jerk. And so, what I would say is my specialty is people who are too much in their mind, trying to force life on the mental level. So if you're smart, if you're talented, hardworking, but for some reason things just don't click, you can't make that breakthrough. you're stuck, you get ahead and you get thrown back, right? One thing that Carl said is when you live from the mind, you can make a living, but you can't make a killing. So you'll be able to make enough money to survive, but you'll never be free of the financial stress. You can achieve some of your goals, but it's just not going to be fulfilling. It's not going to do what you want. And so if that's you, I'd love to talk to you. Not everyone was a good fit for this. When I was younger, the first maybe 5-8 years I did healing, I thought I could go out and save the world. I thought I could fix everyone. What I've learned with maturity in years is, one, no one needs fixing. We're all beautiful and perfect as we are. We just have so many judgments running in the mind, we can't see it. I tell my students and to do the foundational training with me, I see you all as Ferraris covered in mud. You're this gleaming, beautiful, elegant, high-performance machine that everyone thinks looks like a pile of garbage because it's covered up by mud, right? The mud would be our trauma, our pain, our low self-esteem, etc. And my goal is to help you to wash off the mud. We're all incredible and amazing beneath it. But society has conditioned us to think otherwise. Why? Simple. There's a lot of powerful, wealthy people making a lot of money and growing their power by keeping us in the dirt. It's that simple. And, again, I'm not a perfect fit for everyone. I'm a little impatient. I have high standards. And I'm not just going to give you a big hug and tell you it's okay. If that's what you want, that's great. I got friends, colleagues who are very good at that. I approach things as an engineer. What's going on? What's the cause? How do we take action? How do we get results? And not everyone is ready for the high level work either. I'll just caution everyone. You have to be ready to really see the truth of what's going on deep inside. And, I've blown up a lot of relationships by pushing people into the advanced work who weren't ready for it. One was my tech, I won't say his name. He worked for me for over 10 years, managed my websites, blah, 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 right? He was curious about it. He had watched my videos, been to one of my trainings. He's like, Brent, I want to do a movement session like Carl did with you. And I said, okay, but I'm going to warn you, when I'm there connected to you, all I can do is tell you what I see. I have to turn off my filters. I can't think about it, right? It's just, I see this, I see this, I see this. And he was like, oh yeah, I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it. I'm ready. I'm like, okay. And we did it for 5 minutes. And he got so angry with me, he shut down our video call, and I have not spoken to him since. It's been over 6 years. So not trying to scare anyone away, right? I'm just saying this is for those that are willing to dig deep. And you have to be ready to see the darkness, because that's part of it. It's not all of it. We have to be willing to see the darkness and embrace it as part of us, what Carl Jung called the shadow. And so the advanced work is a lot of integrating the shadow, that which we've judged and pushed away as wrong, dangerous, bad, etc. When you're willing to see that everything has a part in the divine plan, and we're willing to get past the limiting judgments of the mind, I think you'll like what happens. But again, I can't predict exactly. If I had a magic crystal ball that could tell someone exactly how long and what it's going to take for you to achieve your goal, I would make a lot more money. Life would be a lot easier. I don't. So we have to be willing to be stuck as long as we need to be stuck. We have to be willing to suffer as long as we need to suffer. We cannot control that from the mind. But when we're surrendered to it, then we can really move forward. And the whole aspect of the awakening, the deep spiritual study, is to give the mind a deep understanding of reality so that it sees why surrender and letting go makes sense. Because wouldn't you both agree that in our culture, the way we're taught to live from the mind in terms of achievement and ambition, surrender doesn't make a lot of sense, does it, right? You don't surrender, you work harder. I'm saying is that doesn't work very well. And until your mind becomes your ally, it's going to fight you every step of the way. It's like a car. There is no car ever made that can overpower their own brakes. And me and a lot of my students, when I first work with them, they're in their car metaphorically slamming on the gas, wondering why it's not going anywhere. Like, you got to take your foot off the brake first, right? That's what I specialize in.
Brent, I got a question for you. My question can be, in its simplest form, broken down to one very basic idea. To what extent is what you teach a conversation, and to what extent is it a lecture?
At the very beginning, there is lecture, because there is a certain foundation of things you need to know to become fluent, to be able to participate in the conversation. But it very quickly evolves into a conversation. It would be such as, in order for us to have a conversation here, we need to have a common language, don't we? Right? If Walt spoke Japanese and Anne-Marie spoke Hindi, and I only spoke English, we couldn't have a good conversation.
Well, you need to have more than a common language. You have to have a common context.
Yes, exactly. Both are necessary. So there is some lecture at the beginning, just to get enough common foundation so we can communicate and come together. But it very quickly turns into a conversation. And what I found is, both in my private sessions and the trainings I do with my students, at first, I could do 1 or 2 or 3 healing sessions with people, and you just give me 3 words about your problem is, and I can clear blocks for you. That's easy. But the deeper you go, the more conversation it becomes. Why? Many of us have very common blocks. And I've created some downloadable programs. If you want to clear them on your own at a much lower price per block, that's what they're for. But at a certain point, you need another human to work with you one-on-one to identify what's really going on deep inside, right? Or to work in small groups. So, I'd say in my basic training, it's probably 50% lecture, 50% hands-on. By the time you get to my highest level group, the Awakening Intensive, it's less than 5% lecture. There's always more to learn, right? But it's 95% plus conversation, which, by the way, can only be done either one-on-one or in small groups. I don't know any effective way to have a conversation with 400 people. Maybe you do. I have no idea. Right? But one-on-one or a group of 4 or 6 or 10, you can do that. And that's, my goal is to get you through the lecture as quickly as inexpensively as we can to get to the good part, which is the conversation. So, as Walt, I'm sure, knows, you ask an engineer a question, you're going to get a thorough answer. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was counting on that, actually. Yeah. So I guess I just have one follow-up question to go with it, which is, to what extent is let's see, how do I want to frame this? To what extent is the process that you lead people through an energy exchange?
I would say there has to be an energy exchange, or it just doesn't work. And, for the most part in our modern world, the exchange is money. But it's more than just that. That one thing I have found is I learn something every single time I teach. And almost anyone that's been a professional healer learns, at least if you're doing it right, that your clients are helping to heal you at the same time you're working to heal them. But my experience, exchange is a law of the universe, one of the metaphysical laws, just as powerful as the law of attraction or the law of gravity. And that's why I found, and again, I'm not the only one, anyone that's done this work professionally for a length of time has found the same thing. Every time I raise my rates, I start getting better results. But here's the important thing I want everyone to hear. The offer of exchange is relative to where you're at in life. And so my late mentor, Carl, he had a sliding session for private scales. And I charged less than him, just so don't be scared away by the numbers. When I had my first session with him in 2008, he charged between $500 and $2,000, and you got to pick. And I was really struggling with money, so I picked the smallest one. And the reason he did that is If you're an executive at a big company and you're making 300 grand a year, $500 isn't enough. It's not enough. It's not enough for you to move the needle. And so he said, hey, if you're in a really great place, you need to pay me more. And I would say that's exchange. It's relative to where you're at. When I do healings on small children, I will say to them, you need to do something for me, but I'm not expecting them to pay me. That's what their parents do, right? I have them draw me a picture and mail it to me. Something like that, right? So even when I work with young children, I mean, if it's an infant, no, right? I don't expect a dog to draw me a picture. But I always ask for exchange based on where they're at and what is meaningful to them, what they can provide. But yes, in my experience, there has to be exchange. One of the biggest mistakes beginning healers make is giving away their work too freely and too easily. And so what I found when I first started doing this professionally, I reserved a portion of my schedule, particularly for people that were disabled, because I had a big soft spot for that. And I gave away sessions either for free or like $5. What I found was over 80% of them never attended their session. And when I got rid of that and made them pay a much more, a more reasonable market competitive rate, back in the old days, I used to charge $85 an hour. All of a sudden, my show up rate was 95%. And so again, this is nothing personal. This is just the way the universe works. But again, it's not about the number. It's about, it has to be something that's meaningful to you. So if you're in such a difficult place that $10 affects your life, that's plenty of exchange. If you're worth $100 million, and I have worked with a couple of clients who had that level of wealth, they're much harder to get to shift. Because to them, even if I charge them $1,000 an hour, that's nothing, right?
Sure.
Be like for most of us, if they said, "Hey, Brent, can you get that dirty penny out of the backyard and give it to me?" I'm like, all right. So it has to be enough to be meaningful to you. That's what matters, and it doesn't have to be money. I tell my students it can be, give them a ride to the airport. When I had my first session with Terry, my Aunt Lauren paid for it, but I did some favors for her, helping her with some yard work because I didn't have any money, but I was able to help her out with a few things, if that makes sense. So is there exchange? Yes, but it can be flexible. We want to hit that sweet spot. It's enough to move the needle, but not so much to put your life into crisis.
Brent, you got to tell people how they can reach you.
So anybody that is interested to learn more, a couple places to look for me. I'd start with my website, which is at awakeningdynamics.com. And if you go to my website, you'll see a big button right on the homepage. It says something like podcast special. What I want to offer to every single person listening, including Walt and Anne-Marie, if you're interested, this open to you too. I will give you a free 15-minute, what we call discovery call, so I can learn a little bit about you and decide if you're a good fit for me or not. And I want to let you know in advance, it's nothing personal. I used to take on all comers, but I don't do that anymore because I don't want you spending time and money on something that I don't have some confidence is a good fit. Mm-hmm. And if you're a good fit, we can talk more about how we might work together, lots of different ways. I have one-on-one, small groups, larger group trainings, downloadable self-study. I got tons and tons of stuff. If you're not, I promise you, I will give you a recommendation as to who or what might be a better fit. So anybody that's interested, I'm happy to give you 15 minutes for free to see if I can help you. Just go to awakeningdynamics.com. I'm going to ask you just a couple simple questions. Are you at a place in your life where you're ready to work on this, etc.? Contact info and we'll go. If you want to learn more first, you're welcome to. I have a YouTube channel. Head over to YouTube, put in Awakening Dynamics or Brent Michael Phillips, and it should come right up. I think I've got like 170 videos or something on there on many different topics. That's a great way to learn more, and it won't cost you a penny. And if you feel ready, again, go to my website, awakeningdynamics.com. A lot of info there. Reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you. No charge, no obligation, to see if you're a good fit. Because, as I was telling Walt and Anne Marie before the interview, in the old days, I wanted to like get as many people into my classes and programs and numbers and all that. What I've learned is the wrong fit is more trouble than it's worth. So I'm willing to do this as long as you show up and being honest. I'm happy to give you some of my time for free to point you in the right direction. My goal is to build my community. It's small, but it's very active, of people that are teaching, practicing, and applying this work. I see it like a scientific collaboration. I don't have all the answers. So I have a small group of students who are also professional practitioners and teachers. We get together all the time to discuss what works, what didn't, what happened here, to slowly evolve the technology, to make it stronger and stronger. And so if that appeals to you, hey, I'd love to be your guide. That the poet Rumi famously said, without a guide, a journey of 3 weeks will take over 100 years. And I'm the first to admit, without my guides, my master teachers, first Terry and then Carl, I never could have gotten anywhere near where I am now. Even had you given me 1,000 years, I don't think I could have done it. But with their help and assistance, again, it wasn't like everything was fixed overnight. But over the course of months to years, changes occur. And if I had one piece of advice to give, it would be, please do your best to let go of what you think you know. We all live in prisons constructed out of what we think we know. So if you think you're too old to find love, or too disabled to make money, or you're hopeless or not good enough, my offer to you is simple. Do you want to be right and keep living that? Or are you willing to be wrong about what you think you know? If you are, and that's why I mentioned my life had to be put into crisis first. Not just once, but over and over, right? That's okay. I don't judge you if that's the case. But it doesn't have to. If you're willing to be wrong about the most fundamental things, what are you? What is the nature of God? How does life work? Life is not about what you're doing nearly as much as what you're not feeling. And that's, like Walt said, there's more than the left brain. There's also the right brain. And should I mention the whole rest of the body? And I love the mind. I love the brain, right? That's my comfort zone. That's my sweet spot. But living from the mind drove my life right into a ditch. It wasn't even a ditch. It was freaking hell. And only embracing the rest of it, the intuitive, the creative, the feminine, the physical, was I able to come out of it.
Anne Marie, as we're drawing to a close, is there anything that does getting out and saying, yeah, that's like an important thing to keep in mind from this exchange we've had with Brent?
Yeah, I think that there's been quite a bit there, actually, sort of food for thought. I think, even if you don't think you're going to be a fit for Brent, I think the advice is just about letting go. We don't have to hold on to everything, and we don't have to own everything. We can just release it in some way, even if you're breathing it out, whatever works for you, but just not having to hold on to everything, because I think that's quite freeing.
Yeah. And a lot of it is we're not even aware we're holding it.
Exactly.
You don't
I think the more you do this,
you are.
Yeah, the more you do this kind of thing, the more uncomfortable your feelings get, the more you've got to let go. I think another thing that was so evident throughout the whole story was that, these hard knocks in life that we all complain about and get distressed about can just be that little diversion to the right side of possibility. So it's just to remember that. And then the other thing I've learned over the last 20 minutes is that your feet get really hot when you're trying to lift your middle toe.
I love it.
Because I have been trying to do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, what happens is the heat is a byproduct of consciousness trying to move into it. That it's like water running into a dam. The friction creates heat. So, if you go push on a door really hard and, hit it over and over and push on it, your hands will warm up.
Yeah.
So that heat you're feeling, that's the consciousness running into the blockages. And the friction of the pushing creates heat that we feel. It's
Yeah.
very common, people doing the movement work, you'll start to feel warm. You may turn red and even start sweating. And that's what happens when energy starts to move where it's been stagnated.
Mm.
And, sometimes we see miracles within minutes or hours. It happens. I've seen well over 1,000 legitimate miracles in my clients, but sometimes it takes longer.
Yeah.
Some of my issues took me years to work through. And so, again, if you're willing to engage the journey and not think you know it all, the sky's the limit. I don't know exactly where you're going to end up in life, but it's usually better than what you thought. Usually a lot better than what you might have thought was even possible.
Very true.
And Brent, it sounds like you've been able to quite effectively zero in on what I'll call your niche, your community, the people that you interact with well. And,
Yep.
and that's a fabulous thing when that happens, because
Yep.
it's often called finding your tribe. You
Yep.
found your tribe.
Yep. If you're a nerd, if you're a head case, if you think too much, and especially if you feel frustrated by life, I think I can help. I can help.
Well, thank you for telling your story and sharing time with us. And we wish you all the best going forward. And thank you for continuing to help people in the way that you have.
Oh, it's been great being on here, and I hope we could reach out. The way I see it, if we can help just one person move forward in their life, it's all worth it.
Very good. All right, Anne-Marie, as usual, it's been wonderful.
Thank
And
you
thank
all.
you to our
That was
podcast
good.
listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.